Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus today. Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about how radical Marxist struggle session sort of agenda is pushed into particularly junior schools, but also in other schools, universities as well. But how do they begin with the young kids to sort of get them acclimatized to these radical struggle session ideologies? Well, same as we see with Disney and Hollywood, they'll take a classic fairy tale, could be Snow White or I don't know, Little Mermaid, and then they'll just inject wokeism into it. And for example, in the remake of Snow White, which I think they're remaking the remake, as I understand it now. But it was going to be Prince Charming is a fascist Nazi right-wing oppressing stalker. Snow White is actually a boss chick who don't need no man and kicks ass. And the Seven Dwarfs are a mixture of oppressed racial minorities and so on. So they just inject wokeism all through it. And why? Did anybody ask for it? Did anybody want it? Is what the audience wants. Is it going to increase the audience? No. The sole purpose is to push propaganda, race, gender, sexuality propaganda into it, because this is what creates social division, and social division is what the globalist cabal wants. So now let's have a look at how they use fairy tales, especially with young children. They use children's stories. So the handbook is firstly engage the children with a fairy story. It could be Snow White, it could be anything, Little Red Riding Hood, it doesn't matter. And then once you've got them engaged and you've brought them into the fantasy world, you then start asking struggle session questions. Now you can reframe this in, say, well, it was summer, nice warm summer day on the weekend. So how many people went to the beach and did you have an ice cream? So some kids put their hands up. Well, the children who didn't go to the beach or didn't have an ice cream, put up your hand. Oh, well, children, that's not really fair, is it? So-and-so had an ice cream, but someone else didn't. That's not fair. Don't you think everybody should have an ice cream? Isn't that the right thing to do? Yes, everyone should have an ice cream. Yeah. So, all right then, well, and then somebody went to the beach, somebody didn't. Well, why couldn't you go to now that the teacher will be ahead of the game? She knows that little Billy Bob there, his parents don't own a car and they can't afford to go to the beach, or the parents have to work on weekends or something. So she'll know enough, so she'll be able to pick on. But well, Billy Bob, how can you didn't go to the beach? Oh, it's because your parents don't have enough money, isn't it? Well, that's not the case with Jimmy Jack over there. Jimmy Jack's parents have got money and he can go to the beach. Well, that's not fair, is it? Why can't everyone go to the beach? Everyone should be able to go to the beach. And so they'll inject that. They'll start off with the fairy tale, get the engagement going with the kids, and then they'll start pointing out differences in outcome, which they will then reframe as unjust. It's not fair. It's not fair that this is happening. Everybody should be able to go to the beach. Everyone should have an ice cream. Well, and who had the $20 ice cream, the most expensive ice cream? So, you and you. Well, shouldn't everybody have the $20 ice cream? So and so went to the beach in Dad's brand new convertible. Shouldn't everyone have a brand new convertible? Why can't everyone have a brand? That's not fair, is it, kids? And so they'll go down that path. So they'll acclimatize them to take the view that any outcome that's not equal, equity, any outcome's not equal must be unjust. It's not fair. It's not fair. There's something wrong. Why can't everybody have a waterfront mansion? Why can't now? This is very much the Marxist sort of dialectic. the discussion or interchange around is very much the Marxist way of framing and couching all things. Even going back to the 1840s or even earlier than that with Kant and so on, Hegel and the like. And Marxists say, well, this is the guy who owns the factory and lives in a nice house, and this is the casual worker that works a couple of days a week, and he doesn't live in a night. He lives in some shitbox place, and and he doesn't have access to enough money to have healthcare and so on. That's not fair. And when you put it everybody should have a nice house. Everybody should have access to first-rate healthcare. Everybody should have lots of money. Everybody should have hot chicks to date, and so on and so on. So this is very much, again, the Marxist thing that why do some people have and some people have not. Now, the details aren't relevant, and people's starting point, who works hard, or who's lazy, or who's clever and who's stupid, or who's responsible, who's irresponsible. No, forget about that. There is a difference in outcome, and that's what we're going to focus on. Now, to be sort of cast the context net just a little bit wider here, fairy tales have been, remember initially when fairy tales were around, and these sort of ideas of this is how you convey a moral message in particular, this is when there are a very small number of people who are literate. You're looking at the aristocracy and the clergy, really, with a few others, but really that was so the literate class was people who could read and write, was fairly small, and so if you wanted to communicate messages, you had to do so via spoken parable, and the moral message was contained in it. So Hansel and Gretel, for example, well, don't go into the woods on your own, children, because you're going to meet a wicked witch will cast spells on you, or little girls, don't go walking through the woods alone, or the Little Red Riding Hood, the wolf will eat you or try to eat you. So there were stories in there. If you look at the Grimm's, say, fairy tales, they were pretty harsh in their original iteration. A number of them were, and she had these burning shoes and then danced in the burning shoes until she fell down dead. And so there was a lot of death at the end of some of those fairy tales, the Grimm's fairy tales. So they were softened so that the moral lesson was learned without the death. But if you look at all of those fairy tales, they had some sort of moral in them. And if you look at, say, even the Victorian era novels such as The Water Babies and some of Charles Dickens stuff and Bleak House and the list goes on, where they were it was a novel, of course, but they were trying to convey messages to the failings of human behavior, or the failings of social organization, ignoring children, using children to work in factories, sending children up chimneys to clean out the chimneys. The children would get stuck there and couldn't get out, and just leaving them there wasn't worth the egg. And the lives of the working class were considered irrelevant. And even when I think it was John Adams, when he was ambassador to England or Britain, he was amazed by, and bear in mind he lived in a rural area, but he was amazed by how in London there were armies of young children that were unattended, just roaming around, and of course they were having to steal to live and so on. So he was staggered that an empire as wealthy as Britain could have all these unwanted children in these large gangs, roaming around and sleeping rough and so on. But coming back to the idea of morals, so the idea of conveying morals in children's stories is in itself not new, and I suppose a case of which morals. Now, the morals certainly that I remember as a kid, going to Sunday school or they had religious lessons at school. I think it was only 1 or 2 lessons a week. But the idea of was to show you how to be responsible, encourage responsibility, encourage honesty, encourage truth, encourage fact finding, these sorts of things. And any sort of morals and stories and tales and so on were told with the view of making you a better citizen and a better person. That didn't mean you weren't encouraged to see wrong. It was more in the law breaking or untruth or evil. You were encouraged to combat that. But evil, as in it would be evil viewed by anybody. It wasn't a debatable evil or a relative evil or so on. But so there was a very substantial difference in the purpose and the point of the morals and the stories and the fairy tales that were being told to how they are now, where you're encouraged to view your fellow citizens, the person sitting next to you in the class as a Nazi or a fascist, or white people are evil and so on. No, I don't remember ever being taught that any race was evil. I certainly don't recall it if it was taught. I didn't come away with that view. And yet I came away with the morals being taught as a kid about right and wrong, and defending the weak, protecting the weak, these sorts of things. And I know it had an effect on me. I just thought it was wrong. Or there was this handicapped kid at school, and the others used to pick on him. And one day I decided I had enough and go, no, hey, leave the guy alone. And there were the people there who I thought were rather malevolent. They took absolute delight in humiliating this guy and slapping around. And then I got the warning, so well, you better keep out of it, Billy Bob, otherwise we'll beat the shit out of you. Yeah, sure. And I remember getting into a number of sort of fights and confrontations over those sorts of things. And even I think back now, I didn't intervene when I saw frail little kids getting beaten up by other kids. But anyway, the point of teaching right from wrong and all that sort of stuff, that's gone. It's now the moral sort of relativism, and this idea that it's not fair if someone has an ice cream and somebody doesn't. It's not fair that Billy Bob's parents spend all their money on booze, so they can't afford to take Billy Bob to the beach. Is that a lesson that should be learned? Well, sure, yeah, absolutely. Or Jimmy Jack's, parents spend too much time, doing business with a local drug dealer, so they can't afford to put food on the table. Or Billie Jean's parents dropped out of school when they were 15 years old, and they've only got the most basic low-paid jobs, and they're lazy and don't care and can't be bothered to pay the rent and this sort of thing. So why don't we look at those sorts of things? But no, instead it's just to focus on outcomes. Or it could be somebody went to Disneyland on the weekend. Who went to Disneyland? Well, only 2 people went to Disneyland. Well, that's not fair, is it, children? Everybody should be able to go to Disneyland. And again, encouraging that. Now, once that mindset takes hold, and you get, the green and blue-haired, kids coming out of university that believe that everything is unfair. Nazis are making it unfair. Straight white males are all Nazis. It's unfair. We have to root those people out. I've been to business, again, I've got a share in a business, and I've been to business meetings where we get the diversity, equity, inclusion director effectively giving us almost like a dressing down before we even started, giving us the moral lecture of, well, you're straight white males, you don't understand what it's like to be oppressed, to be a black, lesbian, transgender, So you're as good as Nazis, and we'll be watching you. You one step out of place, you guys, and tell you what, we'll be coming for you. Get those sorts of things. The finger wagging from some 20-year-old blue-haired lunatic giving us a finger wagging lecture on moral rectitude. Now she's been exposed to that since. Yeah. Well, why can't everyone go to Disneyland and this sort of stuff? So you don't look at, but I was taught to look at the inputs. Are you working hard? Are you making sensible decisions? Are you, are you honest and true? Are you this and that? Those sorts of things. And I was taught to see the world from that perspective. Was it a perfect education? Of course not. Were there shortcomings in it? Absolutely. But at least the training wasn't all, if outcomes are different, there must be something, not just a little bit wrong or needs adjusting. There is great evil abroad if outcomes are not equal, and we must root out that evil and punish those and that type of sort of thing. So it's a very different way of looking at the world. Some of you may remember, if you're old enough, the cartoon, I think it was a Disney one, I think it was called The Ugly Duckling or something like sounding like that, where there was a duckling that was being shunned by the others, the other ducks or the other birds, whatever it was, and the ugly duckling, went off in tears, and you couldn't, as a kid, I remember being quite moved by that. Not moved by whether the duckling was ugly or not, or whether there was some. The ugly duckling had trespassed, or wasn't that sort of thing that I viewed it as unjust. It was unjust, and that was something that I came away from childhood with that sense of justice, that justice and the law is there to protect all of us, and only when people fiddle with it and fuck with it does it cease to operate as it should. So the idea is that the weakest must put upon person in the community, no matter who it is, they are protected by the law just as much as I am, or the folks down the road, or the guys around the corner, or that sort of thing. So that I believe very much in that as a kid, that person is entitled to those protections, and it could be the one-legged proverbial black lesbian, but they're still entitled to that protection under the law, and to representation and to hearing in a court of law by an independent, impartial judge who's not under political pressure to produce a certain decision. That to me was the greatest protection any one of us can ever have in any society: impartial, clearly codified, independent, apolitical law. Now we've lost all that, and it's seen very different now. Well, the outcomes are equal. That's not fair, is it? We have to do something. Now, if the law doesn't protect them, then we just have to engage in activism to make sure that outcome, because it's not fair. Everybody should be able to go to Disneyland and have the most expensive ice cream. And this is so when they get into the young minds at that age, portraying everything like that. So it's everything is, they're encouraged, the teachers are encouraged to do everything on that. Well, Shakespeare says that so-and-so has a fine cloak. Does everyone have a fine cloak? Well, that's not fair, is it? Everyone should have a fine cloak or a fine coat. And the list goes on. They can look at anything. All right, then. Well, I've got your grades here for the mathematics test. Three of you got Billy Bob, Billy Jack, and Jimmy Jones got passes here. So only three of you passed. Well, that's not fair, is it? Everybody should pass. Everybody should get 100 out of 100. And once you infect the classroom and the teaching methods that way, then no one sees the world the same way. Again, no one sees the world from the point of view of justice or right or wrong or good or bad or anything of that nature. It's completely recast and reframed so that these people are almost incapable of functioning in the real world. You've been a Tasseless today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.